If data has gravity, what does that mean for cloud computing? Simply put, cloud databases will soon dominate the market. The best news? There are so many options. And for developers, it's easier than ever to leverage these technologies. That's great news for the future of business.
The future is here already. It's just not evenly distributed. Yet. Today's world teems with innovation. The nexus of hardware, software, and human ingenuity promises a revolution in possibilities. What does tomorrow look like? Witness Future Proof.
Folks, this is a mammoth show. My friends, we've got an all-star cast today. We're going to hear from legends in the business and up-and-coming wizards. We'll talk to Bruno Aziza of Google, Stephen Brobst of Teradata. We've got Mark Cusack from Yellowbrick and Robert Hedgpeth from MariaDB coming on the show today, all about cloud databases. Sky's the limit, why cloud databases will rule. And of course, the cloud is just kicking butt these days, folks. Let's be honest. You got Microsoft, Amazon, Google, all duking it out. That's great for competition, folks. It's great. I always joke that it's ironic. We can thank Microsoft for saving us from monopoly, right? Which is odd, from AWS. And then, of course, we've got Google as well, cranking it up as well. So we got a lot of fun stuff happening out there. And since we have an all-star cast, I'll just jump right in, bring in Bruno Aziza from Google. Bruno, tell us a bit about yourself and where you see cloud databases going.
Hi, everyone. I'm Bruno Aziza, and I'm the head of data and analytics at Google. And I'm very bullish on cloud databases, as you might guess. And it's really a result of what we see in the market. I think if you look at projections from Gartner, 75% of all databases will be deployed or migrated to cloud platform by 2022. 86% of total database management system market revenue growth in 2020 was cloud-based. So there's clearly a market movement here, customers moving to the cloud rapidly to modernize their approach to the market and be more competitive. So really excited to be on this panel today.
Yeah, and so let me just ask you a couple of questions. You've been in this industry a long time, and we've all kind of seen cloud coming. I was surprised that it took as long as it did. It was really about 3 years ago that I noticed, and I'm a marketer, so I noticed when we'd send email blasts out with cloud topics that all of a sudden it was hot, because it wasn't hot until then. Like 4 years ago, it was still just sleepy time. If you sent an email out with cloud in the subject line, who cares? Nobody even opened it. Now it's everywhere. And I think there are lots of different factors for that. And I'm pretty sure that COVID was an ultimate forcing function to really push that whole movement forward. What do you think about that?
I think it's a combination of a few factors. I think, first of all, you've got digital native and data native companies that are disrupting industries in ways that, has never been seen before. So certainly over the last 5 years, these companies have made a name for themselves. Many of them have gone IPO, and people are starting to look at, okay, what is the infrastructure that's powering this disruption? And a lot of it is cloud nativity. And so with big data and cloud coming together, people have realized the benefits of being able to deploy applications faster, scale them faster at a cost-effective way, and also ramp them up and down and be agile in a way that nobody could do it before. I also think that we probably crossed a line where people were thinking that the cloud was less secure, that you own on-premise data centers, and I think people just saw the success of course, digital natives, but also large organizations, large banks, where their data were stored in the cloud, where they were running cloud native applications powered by these databases. And so I think people are starting to realize, wait, the cloud infrastructure actually might be more effective. It could be a great engine of innovation, and in fact, might be even more secure than my own environment. And so I think that's what we noticed here in the last few years, where there's been really a shift where people are just now starting in the cloud. We're not talking about migration. We're starting with cloud and nativity.
Yeah, cloud native, we're going to do a whole series on that at some point because it's a really seriously big deal and it's a different architectural approach, right? One of the beautiful things of the cloud, and there are so many positive aspects. I love all the metadata that gets baked into everything you do. When you log in, touch something, all that stuff is captured. And I think we frankly learned a lot of lessons in the 40 years of on-prem dominating the industry. We learned certain things, and I think a whole lot of those best practices just got baked into cloud offerings, right, Bruno?
Yeah, I think that's correct. I mean, if you think about, and you and I have talked about this before, I always think about, okay, well, the dimensions of being in the cloud and being cloud native organization, how do you choose? And there's five, we call it the 5 S's, right? So there's 5 dimensions you need to look at when you're thinking about running data or running systems in the cloud. What are they? So the first one is, of course, you got to start with scale, right? And the benefit of the cloud, we all know this. This is now well known by everyone. The second one is security. The third one is speed. So while you're, of course, able to deploy applications faster, is the data now being made available faster to people that actually need to make decisions with that data? So that's your third S, if you will. Then you've got simplicity. Is the environment that you're dealing with open enough so it can accommodate the other applications, the other clouds that you're working with? I think we'll talk about this later, but when we're talking about moving to the cloud, we're really talking about clouds. What we're seeing customers doing is, living in a multi-cloud environment, and they need cross-cloud capabilities. And then the final S is what I call the smarts, which is, do you have intelligent applications running on these clouds so you can make decisions faster on dramatically larger data sets now and a wider access to information than you did in the past?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think you nailed it. Those are the fundamentals. And then as you look at the future of enterprise computing, it's going to be multi-cloud. I mean, there's just no doubt about that. I think on-prem is going to have a long tail, but really the sooner you can migrate into the cloud, the sooner you can move off of these on-prem data centers, the better, right, Bruno?
I think that's correct. I think, you might want to look at your ecosystem and realize that maybe there are some parts of the assets that, make a lot of sense to have gravity on-prem. But then you have to look at the entire ecosystem and decide, which are the applications that are born in the cloud that these databases need to support? Which is the data itself that is born in the cloud that is needed to be supported by, maybe one cloud, maybe multiple clouds? I think the data that we've seen in the market is a large proportion. I think it's over 80% of organizations have a multi-cloud strategy today. And so you have to start with that as a design principle, which is you're going to have a very hybrid environment for a very long time.
Yeah, and the last question before I bring in Stephen Brobst, this from the earliest days of DM radio, I would ask the question, when is the ETL madness going to stop? We keep moving data around and around and around and around. Every time you do that, it costs money, it takes time, it takes resource, there are errors, there's all kind of stuff that happens. I think we're finally at that point where we can access data where it lives. The technologies for that part of the stack have gotten so powerful that you don't need to be moving everything on big trucks all around the enterprise all the time. Is that what you're seeing too?
That's what we're seeing. Although I will tell you, I think in general, moving data is a bad idea for many reasons. The first one is the delay. You're paying for that storage twice. And so certainly, and it's not highly secure, right? You have to think about when you're working with data, you have to have technology that allows you to have security in transit and security at rest. And so that's really complicated, expensive, and time-consuming to move data. What we have been focused on, of course, is meeting customers where they are. And so, for instance, we have a service called Data Stream that allows you to think about, well, if there's data that needs to stay over there, how do you replicate that data in other systems in a way that's seamless? Change data capture in this world is also an important capability to consider when you want to innovate, modernize without completely disrupting your current systems and habits. And so certainly minimize data movement if you can, but also take a look at, are you deciding not to move the data because you don't like to move the data at all? Or is there a business case for having replication in place in your architecture?
Yeah, no, it makes a lot of sense. And I'll bring in Stephen Brobst now. Fun story. Stephen played a role in getting my career launched in the media business around here. I interviewed him 19 years ago about a topic of real-time data warehousing. Wow, we weren't quite there yet. We're definitely there now. But Stephen Brobst from Teradata, tell us about what you're doing in the space of database and what this cloud thing is all about.
For me, for our customers, the cloud thing is all about innovation and agility, right? We're having a lot of discussions right now about digital transformation, and I would argue at the heart of digital transformation is data. And we need to have an environment where people can innovate with the data, and they can do it fast and cheap, right? In on-prem world, it's just too hard, right? You have to provision servers, roll them in, take delays from servers. In the cloud, you're basically snapping your fingers, and you've got additional resources. It's beautiful. And part of being cloud native is that separation of compute and store, so I can add additional resources where I need them. Right. In the on-prem world, it wasn't so easy to do that. Old style appliances were tightly bundled in their compute and storage, and the software was glued in. And that's in Teradata, we know that world very well. That's the world that on-prem came from. We came from that world, but in the cloud, we re-architected the underpinnings to provide a very, very different capability. So this agility and innovation is really important, and pay for what you consume. So right. that when you spin up a project and you work with it, and if you fail, it's okay. You shut it down, you stop paying. You're not stuck with this innovation hangover from a project that didn't work, and now you're stuck with some gear. That doesn't happen in the cloud. So we can innovate fast and cheap, and this is really a wonderful thing for our customers.
Innovation hangover. I love that. That's a book title or something. But you make a really good point, right? Once bitten, twice shy. Happens all the time. But I think one of the biggest hurdles to get past now is on the business side, and it's the mindset. Now, we have learned some lessons in cloud. One of the funnier lines I heard about AWS is that it's the most ungoverned line on your IT spend budget because it just takes off. I've heard all kinds of stories about that. But nonetheless, the ease of use is critical, but you do have to let go of a lot of old ways of thinking about things, and that can be hard to do. What do you find, Stephen? What works for you to get people to kind of open their minds to the possibility of what's next in this cloud-enabled world?
Well, it's interesting because a lot of people, when they initially get, interested in the cloud, it's because some vendor, some consultant told them that they're going to save money. And there are certainly opportunities from an economic point of view to save money, depending on the nature of your workload, and certainly from a total cost of ownership point of view. But the ones that really get the value go beyond just trying to squeeze the budget. They're actually creating new stuff, and they're creating it more quickly. And I think that one of the big advantages of the cloud is, of course, elasticity and consumption-based pricing and all that. But accessing the cloud native services, stuff you don't have to build anymore,
right?
And you don't have to deploy. You just plug in. So part of being an open data platform, the way that we see it at Teradata, is that you are not the center of the universe. You're part of an ecosystem, and you need to play in the ecosystem, and you need to leverage the native object store provided by the CSP. You need to leverage the security infrastructure. You don't want, as the customer, you don't want to build all that stuff yourselves, and you want to leverage what the CSPs have provided, and you want to do it in such a way that you're part of a bigger ecosystem where they can use those services for other things as well. So for example, if we create an enterprise feature store to enable some advanced machine learning, we can create that enterprise feature store using open data formats and native object store, and then you can turn Spark machine learning library against it using open data formats, and that works beautifully. And as you said, you don't have to copy the data, you have to move the data, you just use it where it is, and you have sort of multiple participants that are sharing access to that data. So to me, that's critical.
Yeah, it's a big deal. And, I actually thought to myself before doing a webinar just a few weeks ago, in fact, that we're really at a fourth stage, almost like a fourth era in enterprise computing. And what I mean by that is, first you had the mainframe, then you had client server, then you had the early days of cloud with ASPs. Remember, application service providers? That was the whole thing, the ASP. I once had a guy joke. I said, "What's the difference between SaaS and ASP?" He goes, "SaaS works." I was like, okay, I get that. So now we're at this next phase where you can build your whole environment inside one of these clouds or in multiple clouds for various reasons. But there's so much functionality baked into it that if you find creative ways to leverage the services in that cloud, to your point, don't go building all this other stuff. Just use what they have. I mean, it's a full-time job just to stay on top of what Amazon is offering versus Microsoft versus Google, right?
Yeah, although, and you have to be a little bit careful because you have to make very, I'll say, conscious decisions about where you get locked into a particular CSP versus where you use cloud agnostic services. And it's not, some people say we're going to have a policy to use all cloud agnostic, or we're going to have a policy to use only cloud native services and so on. And that's a bit naive, because you really have to look at it on a case by case basis. What is the trade-off in terms of the technical debt that I accumulate if I use a cloud native service that is very tied into a particular cloud platform, versus what is the speed and agility I get to, moving more quickly by leveraging that? And that, of course, depends on what are the, cloud agnostic alternatives. And so from a Teradata perspective, we want to support, both of those kinds of decisions, but recognize that there are definitely trade-offs there. And it's not a policy. It's not a, one decision fits all choices in the cloud for most customers. And I would also point out that, most of the customers that I, spoke to, let's say 5 years about the cloud, over 80% of those customers, the cloud that they are now considering their primary cloud today is different than what they considered their primary cloud 5 years ago.
Wow.
Right? And that's huge, right? And so that really shows, based on real data, right, that the need for this multi-cloud capability is absolutely critical. And in fact, in some industries, it's more than critical, it's regulatory requirements. So I was talking to a very large, multinational bank based in the UK recently, and they have something called stressed exit requirement. That means that within 7 days, they need to be able to get their mission critical workload off of one cloud into either back on-prem or into another cloud, because they don't want national infrastructure that's critical to the country, the operation of the country, be dependent on one cloud service provider. And the cloud service provider will say, well, yeah, but we have multiple availability zones. Well, it's not just about that, right? It's also about dependent on a particular organization. But even, by the way, when you have multiple availability zones, all of the major cloud service providers have had outages that took not just down one availability zone, they took down all availability zones. Right, and so if you truly want to have a high availability, you need to be able to fail over from one CSP to another CSP. And so we've got retailers with thousands of stores in North America. I'm not going to name names here, but they have their primary cloud provider is Google. Obviously they're retailers, so they're not a big fan of AWS, and their secondary is Microsoft. But for some things, Microsoft is the primary, and other things is and Google is for others. So use a fit for purpose. They can move the workloads around because Vantage works on either one of those platforms, and they can even have cooperation between those different platforms.
That's good stuff, folks. Don't touch that dial. We'll be right back. Really talking a lot about cloud these days. Databases living in the cloud. We heard from Bruno Aziza of Google and Stephen Brobst of Teradata to start us off. Next up, Mark Cusack from a very cool company called Yellowbrick. And Mark, I came across you guys, I think first in November of 2019, I want to say. I saw you at an event in New York, and it was very impressive technology, entering a very busy space. But hey, if you got a better mousetrap, jump on in and make some fun stuff happen. So tell us a bit about yourself and what Yellowbrick is doing in this whole world of cloud databases.
Absolutely. And hi there, Eric. Nice to see you again. So Mark Cusack, I'm the CTO at Yellowbrick. And yeah, it's been a wild ride. The company was founded in 2017. And over that time, we've carved out an impressive collection of enterprise level customers over that period. And we're having a fantastic year so far. And we do things slightly uniquely in that we've really taken a close, hard look at the route that data takes from those NVMe SSDs all the way through to L3 cache and where it's processed during a query, and minimize that data path. And it gives us a real leg up in terms of performance. And so, we, as with every other vendor in the market, we have a very, very strong cloud strategy and story around here. And for us, it's really underpinned by where we think, not just ourselves, but where others, and think of Gartner, think cloud is going to go to. And Gartner coined a term about a year ago around something called distributed clouds. And this is something they call, and they coined this rather pithy term of distributed cloud fixes what hybrid cloud breaks. So if you can imagine hybrid cloud environments where you've got differing hardware, software, APIs on premises versus what you have in the public cloud arena as well. And what distributed cloud looks to do is take those public cloud stacks and deploy them out of the public cloud. And so Google have, of course, Anthos, you've got AWS Outpost and so on and so forth. And so you get the same, you get kind of a leveling and simplification of the underpinning ecosystem here when you do this, if you've got the same cloud services in different places. And to go back to the point about data gravity, of course, again, another Gartner statistic, I think we're full of them today, which is in 2025, 90% of all data is going to be generated outside of the public cloud data center. And so you've got to start to think about how you deploy data and analytics and warehousing databases at the point of need where the data is and not pulling the data to where the analytics are. So I think distributed clouds are a really interesting kind of direction to go in. And I think it's going to make CIOs' decisions around where they deploy data warehousing a lot less risky, because they've got choice and they can easily migrate between these different deployment targets.
That is very interesting stuff. I'm glad you bring up the edge too, because there's a very interesting architectural set of choices to make, right? Once you start dealing with edge computing, and for our audience, that means any device that's out there in the real world. Your phone is an edge device. Sensors, a lot of times people refer to sensors as edge devices, but you can also have, routers are out there on the edge, for example. And I heard a very interesting story about Cisco and how they just happen to be very well positioned for edge computing with a lot of these routers because they're built with two CPUs. They're built with two processors. It was for redundancy purposes originally, but guess what? That turned out to be really useful when you have one that is used for workloads that are analytical at the edge and the other doing its regular job. So here you can start to do some very clever things about adhering to either regulations, for example, that might change, or taking advantage of where a customer or a prospect is and doing some marketing to them. But the point is, there are all these different options for how you can lay out your new business model. And let's face it, what we've learned in the post-COVID world or near post-COVID is that there are a lot of new, really interesting ways you could do business that we just didn't consider viable before, right, Mark?
Yeah, absolutely right. And yeah, I think, questions around data sovereignty, data privacy, all come into play, data latency, as well as data gravity when you're thinking about where you want to place your workloads. But to the point about edge computing, we're even seeing this happening in the data warehousing space amongst our customer base today. And some of those use cases are a little bit further out for where you might deploy this. But for example, one of our customers is a manufacturer. In fact, they make smartphone lenses for a lot of Chinese smartphone providers. And they have these production lines producing these smartphone lenses, and they're going through quality control and testing all the time. And they're generating tons and tons of data at the production line level that they need to analyze straight away in the factory. They can't backhaul that data up to a public cloud to do some analysis around anomaly detection or failure, predictive failure. They need to know right there and then. So this is where almost data warehousing starts to get into being a business critical, always on operational activity, operational kind of data warehousing, not just deep historical stuff as well, which is an area we're finding ourselves being pulled into more increasingly. That almost crossover between what you traditionally think of a transactional database versus an OLAP kind of style of processing.
Yeah, you bet. Well, let's stick around for the round table. I'll just bring in our final guest, Rob Hedgpeth, waiting patiently in the wings from MariaDB. And MariaDB has one of the most fascinating stories of any company I know. There's a guy, Monty Udanius. I interviewed him several years ago at ZenCon in Las Vegas. And for those who don't know, so there was MySQL, which was an open source database. There was very cool stuff. And Monty started that whole thing, built this whole thing up. And then, of course, Oracle bought Sun Microsystems, which had been shepherding MySQL. And that day, Monty forked MySQL to MariaDB. He's like, oh, okay, you're going to buy my baby? Fine, I'll go this direction. He forked it, started MariaDB, which now in and of itself is a highly successful database company. And it got something called SkySQL. But that guy's hilarious, man. He's like handing out bottles of vodka to whoever wants one. This guy does not slow down. He talked about how it took him like 40,000 emails to build MySQL and MariaDB. Just up late at night, telling people what to do. Very, very cool stuff. With that, Rob, tell us a bit about yourself and what you're doing in this new cloud-enabled world of databases.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. And yeah, just to key off what you said, I mean, Monty is an absolute legend, for sure. Following up with that, not an absolute legend, my name is Rob Hedgpeth, and I head up developer relations at MariaDB. And from our aspect, or, from MariaDB's point of view from the cloud, I mean, as you had mentioned, it really started in the roots of MySQL, right? And being able to use, and for those of you who may not necessarily be aware, something called a pluggable storage engine, which allows you to target different workloads underneath. And, since 2009 of the fork from MySQL to MariaDB, we've really grown from that. And it really just expanded the catalog of pluggable storage engines that you have to be able to use to handle, maybe a write intensive or, types of workloads, or maybe you want to use something like column store or columnar databases in order to be able to tackle things like operational real-time analytics. And as we move into the cloud, what's really great about following, Mark, Stephen, and Bruno is that we've really keyed in on this idea of simplicity in the cloud, really being able to make things simpler. And, from my background as a developer, I've got to say, I love this era that we're in. Stephen hit on it a little bit earlier where he talked about, there's all these concerns about provisioning and installation and configuration that, come with the database traditionally. And myself, coming from more of an application development background, I really just want to get in and use the database to handle the workloads however I need to, and be able to go about my business from the application development side. And so with SkySQL as a fully managed service and a database as a service in the cloud, we're really starting to hone in on something that developers have really keyed in on over the last several years, which is this idea of abstraction, and really balancing abstraction to where you're finding an area where it's not too much, right? You don't want to abstract away everything, so it's just easy click button. You want those knobs and levers available so you can just be dangerous enough with the database, but still be able to get back to your applications or the solutions that you're building in order to be able to get the job done. And so that's what we've really targeted with SkySQL.
You just gave another really good book title right there, Dangerous Enough. I'd love to read that book, all about developers using modern cloud technology. Dangerous Enough by Rob Hedgpeth. Watch for it. It's coming, folks. I promise it's going to happen. No, but you bring up such a good point, because think about it. Simplicity is so important in terms of business function. We don't want things to be incredibly complicated because then only two people can do it. But I think that whole paradigm of the person who was the only one who knew how to set up that table in that database, in that schema or whatever, that has to go out the window. You don't want any single point of failure, whether it's a person or a technology or a box, for example. And so we've abstracted away a lot of these complexities. And to your point, that's great news for the developer, because if anyone has never done development, it takes a certain personality to sit there all day and hack out code and then test it and see if it works. And is it doing what I want it to do? You have to be a patient person and really think stuff through. And if you can just kind of wash away, half of the static that you used to deal with in just trying to provision the database and stay on top of the database, all that stuff goes out the window, then your creativity skyrockets. And your happiness goes up, right? Your morale is improved, right, Rob?
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think that, and that's obviously it's a big focus of mine, coming from more of a developer relations background and, really just trying to help facilitate or, mentor developers into being able to, do what they need to do without the database getting in the way. That's a large goal of ours at MariaDB. And I think that, we also try to focus on, as it being a fully managed service, how do companies grow? How do, applications and solutions, we've mentioned things like scalability and security and different workloads. How can those be managed over time? Because it's really not enough about how you enter the cloud, but how you can grow with the cloud as your solutions may change completely, or you pivot to a different industry or any of these things. And so we've really put a focus on, this ability to be flexible and handle flexible workloads, within the cloud itself.
I love it. Well, folks, thanks so much for your time today. We'll talk to you next time. Send me an email, info@dmradio.biz. We'll talk to you next time.